Okay. All right. चलिए जी. A slightly boring topic, but again, same. असल में ना ये ecology का जो last portion है, ये थोड़ा theoretical है and it tends to get quite boring at times. Uh, but inshallah, I mean, since it's part of our syllabus, let's do this together. So before I jump onto the paper, मैं जल्दी से ये मलेरिया वाला टॉपिक करना चाह रहा हूँ. उसके बाद इंशाल्लाह हमारा जो इसका टॉपिक जो पोर्शन रह गया है, that has to do with the theoretical portion like deforestation, conservation, recycling. That's easy stuff. Inshallah, we'll do that in our next class, half of that time, and then half we'll do the past papers as is the usual practice. So inshallah हमारी next class तक ये topic finish हो जाएगा. चलें जी. So the next thing that we need to know is, let me go to the syllabus and tell you what we're talking about. So we're trying to look at this point, which says describe the malarial, balki ye dono. Understand the role of mosquito as a vector of disease and describe the malarial pathogen as an example of a parasite and describe the transmission and control of malarial pathogen. Details of life cycle of pathogen are not required. Okay. तो हमें इसकी डिटेल में जाने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. जो लाइफ साइकिल है मलेरिया का या फिर mosquito का, लेकिन we will give reference to that and I will explain why that's the case. Okay. So the first thing that we're looking at is the disease. The name of the disease is malaria. The pathogen that causes malaria, unlike many of people think that it is caused by the machar. No, it's not caused by the mosquito. It's caused by a microorganism called Plasmodium. Okay, it's a class of microorganism called Plasmodium. और Plasmodium को carry करता है the mosquito. So therefore we call the mosquito as the vector. Okay, so you have to understand the vector is the female Anopheles mosquito. So it's the female type of this mosquito that is basically that causes malaria. It's not the male. Okay. Actually, so acha, now ye wala jo portion hai, the third point is the transmission is something that you need to understand. I'll try and draw a diagram. Inshallah, maybe that will make sense. So imagine ye ek bande ka arm hai, okay, and this person is not infected, for example, with malaria. This is normal person. एक मॉस्किटो जो है वो आके इसकी स्किन पे बैठता है और आजकल मच्छर जितना तंग कर रहे हैं बस वो अपना पूछे रात को. एंड देन द मॉस्किटो, व्हाई डज द मॉस्किटो सिट ऑन अ पर्सनस आर्म? क्या ख्याल है, क्यों मच्छर क्यों बैठता है हमारे ऊपर? Because it wants
blood.
Yeah, it feeds on our blood. Okay, so what it does is its mouth part, which is known as proboscis, वो उसको pierce करता है. It pierces the proboscis inside our arm to basically suck the blood. Now there's a potential problem for this mosquito, and that problem is when it is feeding the blood, it has pierced the skin. There are chances that the blood may clot, because you know that whenever there's a cut on the skin, clotting would happen. So what it does is when it introduces the proboscis into the skin, it basically you know uh, injects some of its saliva. It injects some of its saliva into our blood. Why is that the case? Because the saliva contains an anticoagulant. Anti-clotting material hota hai usme. So the reason why it's before sucking the blood, it is injecting the saliva is because the saliva contains something that would prevent the blood from clotting. Okay. So therefore it can easily suck the blood and it can go out. Now, so what's the point? The point is, ये जो plasmodium है, it lives in different areas. One of the areas it lives in is the mosquito saliva. So guess what? If the mosquito is a vector, and when I say the mosquito is a vector, it means it is carrying the plasmodium. If this mosquito is carrying the plasmodium and it sits on a person's arm who is normal, does not have malaria, and the mosquito sucks the blood, basically to feed the blood, to feed on blood, the saliva will be injected for the purpose of ensuring for the mosquito that clotting does not happen. But guess what will happen? Since the saliva is being injected, what is being injected with the saliva in the person's blood? हाँ जी बच्चों, क्या इंजेक्ट हो रहा होगा उसके साथ ब्लड में? Let me repeat. Listen to my statement carefully. This mosquito that you can see on the screen is carrying the plasmodium. Therefore, we call this thing as a vector. Therefore, we're calling it as a vector because it contains plasmodium. Okay, it contains plasmodium. That's why we're calling it as the vector. Now, once it sits on your arm to suck the blood, what happens? It injects the saliva. What will that have as a consequence? Along with the saliva, what do you think will be injected?
Plasmodium.
Exactly, the plasmodium. So istra jo hai, this is one way in which the transmission is happening. That's case A. Okay. There's another chance that the mosquito may not be the vector. So the question is, how did the mosquito become the vector in the first place? Kya khayal hai? What do you think is the answer to this? How did the mosquito become the vector in the first place? So
what's a vector?
a vector is something that carries the disease-causing organism. So remember that another place for plasmodium to live is human blood cells. So if a person is affected with plasmodium and a mosquito that is not carrying the vector, it comes and it sucks on the blood, guess what happens? As the blood goes from the infected person into the mosquito now is carrying the plasmodium because it has sucked the blood which contained the plasmodium, and therefore it is known as the vector. ठीक है, ये जो मैंने आपको सारा समझाया ना, ये let's go through these points, you will make sense of them. Okay, so number one, female Anopheles mosquito bites and sucks the blood of the human. Number two, while biting an unaffected person, it injects anticoagulant into the blood to prevent clotting around its proboscis. If the mosquito is already carrying the pathogen, plasmodium, it enters the blood of a person who is bitten. ठीक है, ये जो मैंने आपको पहले example बताई है. And if the mosquito is not carrying the pathogen, then when it bites on an already infected individual for sucking blood as its meal, it picks up the plasmodium. So the plasmodium is now inside the mosquito, and the mosquito is called a vector. So when this vector mosquito will bite an uninfected person, the pathogen plasmodium will be transferred to it. So this is the transmission life cycle. Or this will be past papers make the questions saying you have to describe how malaria is how malaria is transmitted. This is basically what happens. Signs and symptoms आपको पता हो जाए तो अच्छी बात है. वैसे ये requirement नहीं है syllabus की. But the important part to this topic is controlling the malaria. Okay, now there are three angles by which we need to look at this. सबसे पहले तो हम mosquito को रोकें. Why do we need to stop mosquito when the disease is being caused by the plasmodium? Why do we need to stop the mosquito? Ji bachcho, what do you think? I mean, the disease should be stopped by stopping the pathogen that's causing the disease, isn't it? But the first point says by controlling the mosquito vector. Why is this a control for malaria?
Because mosquitoes are the one that take it and transfer it.
Okay, great. So they're the vectors, they're the carriers. Okay, so if we somehow control the insect that is carrying this pathogen, that also curbs and controls the malaria. So number one, by controlling mosquito vector. Number two, by avoiding mosquito bites. Okay, इसके भी मैं आपको तरीके बताता हूँ. And then number three, of course, by treating the parasite if it's there in the blood. So now let's look at all of these points. Number one, kill the mosquito by using pesticides or DDT. ये जितने mosquito coils हैं, the mosquito sprays and all of that stuff. I'm sure in our culture in Pakistan, I'm not sure about Saudi. क्यों भाई नियाज मच्छर होते हैं सऊदी में?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So are they stubborn the way Pakistani mosquitoes are?
Nah, they're way lighter. Pakistan, I heard it's really bad. I've been there too.
Yes, they are really bad. You
very
have no
harsh.
idea. आजकल यकीन करें कि I'm fed up of mosquitoes. And the worst part is, They only bite me. None of nobody else in my children, my wife. Unko nahi kaatta. I mean, I'm like, wow, my blood is sweeter than yours, so maybe they love to feed on my blood. Okay, so number two, spray insecticides or long-lasting chemical sprays to kill the mosquitoes so that they cannot bite and transmit pathogens. अच्छा जी, फिर जो mechanical methods हैं, put screens on doors and windows or using sleeping nets in bed. Have you seen sleeping nets?
Yeah,
खास
that's what I use.
Yeah, okay, so खास तौर पे in our local culture, you know, when the ये जो मजदूर तबका जब घर वगैरह बन रहे होते हैं, तो they when they sleep in an open, they always use these nets because otherwise the mosquitoes will eat the hell out of them. Okay, okay, so this is done, and then apply repellent sprays on skin. वो और mosquito repellent creams भी मिलती हैं, लेकिन वो बच्चों से ज़रा दूर रखनी चाहिए. So you apply the spray and the cream on the skin, and that really helps to, you know, keep the mosquitoes away. Okay, all right. So wear protective long sleeve clothing. By the way, all of these long sleeve clothing or your suggestions are basically coming from the marking scheme. So I'm not saying anything by myself. Okay. All right. So prevent bites, thus preventing adult mosquitoes entering the pathogen. Number six, release sterile males mosquitoes so that there will be no viable offspring. So that's one way. And the other way is modifying the environment. अच्छा, इसके लिए थोड़ा बहुत you need to have a touch about the life cycle. You know, part of the, although the syllabus says that you don't need to know the details, but remember this, that part of the life cycle of mosquito is inside water. तो आपको याद होगा, I don't know if you guys remember, पाकिस्तान में dengue, there was a campaign when dengue virus came, okay? That was also because of mosquitoes. So one of the drives of that campaign was that wherever there was whenever there was water standing in areas, they would, you know, put a fine on that area and so on and so forth. So this first point says draining marshes and stagnant water. Why is that the case? Because the mosquitoes, they tend to hover around water. Also because their mosquito life cycle, because their eggs, larva, and pupa, that's where inside the water they develop. Okay. Acha. The second is also very interesting. You spray oil on the surface. Uh, how is this helpful? Because the larva and the pupa, they are developing inside the water. Or if you are spraying water on the surface, sorry, if you're spraying oil on the surface of the water, that prevents oxygen entry, and therefore you're, you know, lacking. You're basically depriving them of oxygen, and therefore they die. फिर ये एक बड़ी interesting सी fish है, Gambusia fish. Let me highlight this for you. This is Gambusia fish. You throw them in stagnant water and they eat away all of the fish larvae and pupa. And also there's this bacteria that you introduce in stagnant water to kill the larva, okay? Bacillus thuringiensis, the Thuringiensis, whatever the name is. It's okay if you don't remember the name. Uh, just this would do. And then treatment of disease, of course, agar kisi ko ho gaya, to quinine is a classical anti-malarial drug that can be taken to treat the malaria. ठीक है जी. चलो जी, alhamdulillah. So this finishes this topic. Now, let me quickly show you what we're left with in our syllabus. हमारा जो syllabus के points रह गए हैं बच्चों, वो हैं point J से लेके the last 5 points. Now, let me quickly give you an overview of these topics before I end today. They have to do with consequences of deforestation, air pollution, water pollution, so and conservation of species and recycling materials. Now, I've never done this, लेकिन मैं चाहूँगा कि आप next class से पहले एक दफा अपनी textbook की thorough reading करें. Just make sure that you read through your textbook before coming to the next class. That will be beneficial. So in the first half of our next class, inshallah, we'll finish off this theory portion, and then the next half we'll practice the past paper questions. So this way, inshallah, it will be finished. And over this weekend, inshallah, max by Monday, I will upload the locomotion topic also. And just like मैंने आपको promise किया था कि March के महीने तक मैं these two topics, and then I will be uploading the recordings of ATPs. I hope you've downloaded the recording of drugs. If you still haven't, please download, because वो email delete हो जाएगी आपके junk folder से. ठीक है? चलिए, so I think I'm stopping here today. I don't want to start the new topic because it will take a lot of time. So inshallah, see you on Monday, but at the same time, please ensure that you do have a reading of the textbook for these topics. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.